Welcome to another episode of How Are the Children? This is your host Omar, and this week we're going to do things just a little bit differently. In the past few episodes, we've been talking about social issues in our country through a lens that focuses on the most vulnerable, the children. And this week we're going to kind of take a step back and focus on our own inner child and check in with them and see how they're doing. And I know for me personally, something recently in my life that's kind of affected me and really shaped how I speak to myself and how I view myself is my kind of journey through what we call restorative practices. I was a sixth grade science teacher for a couple of years, and after that, I became the restorative practices person on our campus. And through learning about restorative practices and going through those trainings, I not only got more insight as an educator on how to talk to my children or my students, but also just how to talk to myself and give myself more grace. So joining me to have this conversation are two great people who and great mentors in the world of restorative practices that it's really because of them that I've kind of came into this role. Clara and Dr. Chamblee. I went through both of their trainings, and as that's also kind of why this podcast has the name that it has. How Are the Children is a story that I read about through one of Clara's trainings. It was kind of the warm-up piece, and it really stood out to me and really impacted me. So that's why I named this podcast that. So they're with me here today, and I'm very grateful that they dedicated some time out of their day to chat with me. So if you could please introduce yourself. Clara, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Omar, and thank you for inviting me to chat with you today. I'm Clara Elliott. Currently, I work as the coordinator for restorative practices in the Fort Worth Independent School District. And a little bit about me, this is my 18th year in public education. Started as a middle school teacher, sixth grade also. And that was in Fort Worth. Then I transitioned to Arlington ISD, where I first learned about restorative practices. And it was completely by accident. We were in a school that was under the, we were not highly rated. So we had TEA, Texas Education Agency, in our building. And so the administration wanted to do something to address behavior and the culture and climate. And so we were made voluntold, as we like to say in education, to go to a training, and I protested the entire time. I sat at the back of the room, and about 1 hour in, I moved to the front of the room because what was going on was just so intriguing to me. And what I learned is that restorative practices, a lot of people have ideas about it, but what I learned is that it's about building those relationships. And as educators, we all know that there's a quote, there's no significant learning happens without a significant relationship. And so a lot of what we do is getting to know you activities. Our bread and butter, as we like to say, is the circle process where we sit in circle and we share and we just get to know each other in small encounters or micro frequencies. That way, when there is some kind of harm that occurs, we can go and fix that harm. And one of the biggest pieces that's near and dear to my heart is that not only do we try to work to build and repair relationships, the biggest part for me is reintegration, meaning that no one is separate from the community. We're all one big unit, like the body. You can't really function without a brain or a heart or your lungs. So I did that I worked as a consultant with a company for about a year and a half. And then I came back to Fort Worth as a restorative practices specialist, where I met Dr. Chamblee, who was my supervisor at the time, and has become a mentor. I got to meet you, do a lot of training. And then when Dr. Chamblee left, I became the coordinator of the team. And members of my team are also working. We're starting our own nonprofit called Restorative Revolution. So just working to, get some grants so that we can go out and be impactful in the greater Dallas Fort Worth community.
That's awesome. I didn't know that. Congrats. That's exciting.
Thank you.
All right. Like Claire said, I met Clara at Fort Worth ISD. I started out as a New York City public school teacher. This is my 23rd year in education. And I was in a middle and a high school when we were dinged for the disproportionality of suspension of Black and Brown students. New York City Department of Ed offered us three options, and one of the options was restorative practices. And similar to Clara, I was skeptical. I came from social work, so I did understand the importance of relationship, but I didn't think it was important to relate to people who had done me harm. And so they intentionally placed me in a circle with another staff person who they knew I had an issue with. And sitting in that space that was facilitated very well and feeling supported and hearing him unpack some of his encounters as a student helped me to understand some of the responses he had exhibited in the workplace that alarmed me in a different light so that I could then go and have a conversation one on one about what I had observed and how I was feeling. So that was my initial encounter. I moved to Texas in 2017 and I served as an English teacher and a restorative discipline coordinator for a suspension site in Texas, and then moved to Fort Worth where I served as the coordinator for restorative practices for about 2 years, and then moved back to my original district as a coordinator. Currently, I work full-time training and coaching for the International Institute for Restorative Practices. I also have my own LLC, Best Southwest Restorative Practices organization that does training and coaching. And recently, we started a group, DFW Restorative Practices team, and we held our first gathering, which Omar attended, and was really just a way to give practitioners a place to connect and bounce off ideas, and really broadening that idea of restorative to it being multisensory. So we did a lot of focus on the arts, and instead of the normal idea of what people think of when they think about restorative.
Yes, thank you. And I think, all of us kind of had that first doubt of like restorative practices or kind of like questions about it. And I know whenever I was a teacher too, and a lot of the teachers, when I first got to campus, all we see kind of, in the teacher setting is a student acts up, they get sent to the principal's office and they come back with a little lollipop or a little snack. And sometimes that can really frustrate teachers, right? So, and I read that online too. That was a take that a lot of teachers took. Can y'all kind of speak to what that looks like behind the scenes?
Absolutely. When I was in Arlington, that actually happened to me exactly like that. I had a student, um, and he and I did not get along. He was just defiant, and I was defiant, and we just butted heads. And I can't remember what happened, but he walked out of my class, and the somebody in the hall made him go to the office because he's just roaming the halls. And he literally comes back 10 minutes later with a bag of hot Cheetos. And I'm just livid. And the AP comes and talks to me. And before he can even get a word out, I'm just letting him have it, right? They got sent to the office, or they were in the office. They come back with a snack. Like, how does that make me look? How does that look to the other students? He's like, well, Elliott, I'm using something called restorative practices. And I'm like, whatever, right? And so when this training rolls around, which happened to be the following summer, I believe that was in the spring, that's why I just had a stronger version to it, because I don't know if the memes were out yet, but I was like, what I've literally seen is a student was in trouble, quote unquote, gets sent to the office and comes back with a snack. And the rest of my students are like, we've been behaving. We do what we need to do. We're not getting a snack. Why does he get to come back to class? So that was my initial introduction to it, because that's literally what happened to me. And I had an adversarial relationship with that assistant principal for the rest of that semester, because I felt like because he did that, he was ineffective. But now I know that I'm not going to say he wasn't effective, but he only had bits and pieces of restorative practices himself. So a lot of times we we see people who say I'm restorative, or people tell me in schools, I did a restorative today. And you just kind of know where they're coming from.
A restorative.
Yeah, like they Google things and
Mm-hmm.
they see things and they take the parts that resonate with them immediately, but they don't know what the true process is. And it is a process. And Dr. Chamblee and I will often talk about in our trainings that it's a journey, right? You wake up every day and you have to walk to the state of being restorative. You
Yeah.
don't wake up that way. Your spouse might do something to upset you. Your puppy might do something. You might just be in a bad mood, but you have to get yourself centered to be in that orientation that you are a restorative person, and that the interactions you're going to have with people are going to be based on not what they deserve, what you think they deserve, but based on their human dignity, and granting each other that grace, knowing that we all have a different life experience, and just being open to having that relationship, working on that relationship, and doing things to build relationships. I think it's important first to do that with adults in the building, because like you referenced earlier, that inner child, a lot of us have wounded inner children. And as adults, it's really hard to be vulnerable with students. It's just it's just the thing that we have. And once you let that go and once that dissolves away, I think the restorative journey becomes easier for you.
Yeah, I think that's such a important and also just powerful piece of it, because in the training that you and I were at, Clara, that Dr. Chamblee held, it was a professional development for educators on how to better treat our children, but I got a lot out of it for myself. I was like, we talked about the compass of shame and the nine affects, and like all of this research that informs restorative practices. But I use that for myself and really understanding myself, and knowing if I behave this way when this happens to me, if a child is acting a certain way, that's because something happened to them. They didn't wake up wanting to feel this way or wanting to kind of be in a bad mood. So I think that part's really powerful. And I think that's a part where I was like, why is this not a training that's like required for every single teacher in the country? Like, I think this is important stuff for people to know. And specifically us, in Fort Worth, Texas, we have to be even careful about some of the words that we use when we talk about this kind of stuff, right? And it's a very different experience compared to the rest of the country. How have y'all seen that manifest, or what's y'all's experience with that?
Working in a place like Fort Worth that is very conservative. I remember during the lockdown, I would stay up till 2 and 3 in the morning listening to the parents and the community members at the board meetings saying things like, "It doesn't matter. My student's teacher, my kid's teacher, doesn't need to know how my child feels. They need to teach them. That's it, right?" And I just feel like that comes from a place of fear, because you can't you can't do anything in this world without being in relationship with someone. I mean, whether it's the person that, if you have someone that comes in and cleans your house, or your doctor, or the people that are teaching your children, in some shape or form, you are in relationship with them, and it's just easier to get things done when you can relate with people. Dr. Chamblee, as you remember, we used to have this, uh, for lack of better words, an app that the students could go on and just say how they were feeling. And it was just an emoji, and they check in. I'm feeling good. I'm feeling okay. I'm feeling not so well. And it was literally taken from us because parents did not want us
Wow.
getting to know their children. They thought that was, an invasion, and it was too much for an educator. But I grew up in a time where my teacher was literally part of my community. School secretary lived on my block. Teachers lived down the street and in the community. And I just hate that I live in a place where I have to be so careful about my work, and I never know who I can actually tell that I'm a restorative practices specialist, and I do circles with kids, and I teach them about emotional regulation. And it's really unfortunate, and it's really sad, because I feel like the work is revolutionary, but revolutionary is not a word that we should be afraid of.
But in the outside world, I feel like we're in a place where people are very curious about their feelings. I feel like we're having more conversations about mental health. I know my parents didn't, and it was a big learning curve for them to even kind of accept those kinds of things that the new generation is talking about. Like, to them, depression didn't exist. You know, that's not a true thing. So, but now, I know in my generation, we're all about mental health, and even like a simple thing like, have y'all seen the Inside Out 2 movie?
Not yet.
Oh
Not
my God,
yet.
y'all need to.
I haven't even seen the first one yet.
Okay, it's it's literally like an animated version of the Nine Affects, and that's what the whole movie is about. And I thought that was so interesting, and it like smashed box office records, you know. And so I'm like, this is very like this is a testament to like people are ready for these conversations, and this is the kind of work that kind of feeds into that. But then we live in Texas where we have to be careful about that, so it's kind of a weird situation. Um, so, are specific examples working with children? What are some kind of success stories, or some of the like better success stories that y'all have had with this kind of work?
I was sitting with my success story yesterday. I've been training in the local district, and I had a student. So I started my work, like I said, in the suspension site, and I had a student who was suspended 4 times his senior year. And in the time he was with me, at that point, I was the Lone Ranger. I was the only one doing restorative, maybe in the whole district. And so part of my role was doing the work with them to kind of acknowledge what had got them suspended from school and then what type of amends they wanted to make transitioning back. And then I would follow them back and I would hold circle with them back on their campuses. And so he never missed a meeting. Every 2 weeks, he was present, sometimes at the front door and walking me to the meeting space. So now I've left the district, come back, left the district and come back. But the one steady is every time I come back, someone says to me, "Oh, you should really talk to so and so. He is so into building community and connection and sharing his experiences as a student who, who was a challenge and had people so into him and show him how to connect. And he'll come to your classroom and he'll talk to the other kids and he'll hold space for them." And so he's done the work of learning more about being restorative in spaces, and he's joined me 2 years ago. He joined me when I had a group of high schoolers who I trained in restorative, who then went to do community building with some lower grades at one of the middle schools. And yesterday he came by just to check in. I was doing a training and he came by just to check in and see, well, what are we doing this time? Like, I see you're back. What's happening? So I consider him one of my, success stories. He's not alone. There's tons of young people who have taken the work after they've, learned what it really means. So they didn't Google it and then gone to do it in their own spaces in some form or fashion.
Yeah, I had similar experiences, and I think middle school is it's tricky because they're with us for 3 years, right? So we might circle every day or something, but we won't even see the results of that until they get to high school and they're gone, you know. Um, but I had a couple of students who the success is them just even seeking me out, you know. They would
Yeah.
be so emotionally dysregulated and they would go hide or they would just run. And, it's about letting them know you have a place to go to. You have a person to go to. And it's for safety. You know, we always remind them that your parents want you to be safe and I am the person that they trust to keep you safe. So please seek me out and you have a space. And it takes a while, and they obviously they're emotionally dysregulated, so they don't think about what you told them a week or two ago. But it just feels so good, and even though it's a crazy busy day, to get the text message, "Hey, so and so asked for you," and I'm like, "Oh, okay, progress." I love that. Like, thank you, and then I let them know, like, I'm so proud of you for asking for me. Like, that is a huge first step. And then there's other success stories where they have a bit more kind of like more deeper stuff going on at home, and just to see them kind of share that compassion for their own peers, and you see them from afar, maybe in the cafeteria or comforting another friend who might be having a hard time, and then they walk them to me like, hey, he needs to talk to you. They're the kind of spokesperson, but it's just so nice to see. And restorative practices, it's we do it in an educational setting, and we work mainly with children. But I know for me personally, like I mentioned earlier, it has impacted my own personal life and even how I handle my relationships with other adults. I can think specifically of even just like my colleagues at work. I was a restorative practices person on campus, but a lot of the time I had to also kind of hold those circles or have those conversations with the adults on campus too. So I'm curious, what has y'all's experience been like with that?
So we got a unique opportunity to respond to a crisis. I know that sounds odd. To respond to a crisis in Fort Worth ISD where we have a large homeless population of students. And these particular students were on a bus and they had a substitute bus driver and he dropped them off at the wrong shelter. And it just became this disaster, right? And so the leadership of transportation, the people who run the buses, responded in a very ugly way, right? They went out and kind of talked to these people, demeaned them. If you can do a better job, we're always hiring bus drivers, that sort of thing. And it left a lot of hurt. So my team responded and we went out to the shelter and did circles with the students, the children and their parents. And we were told by the district that we couldn't continue that because we wanted to have follow-up listening circles and meet with the parents, after hours. And we were told that we couldn't do that. So I took it upon myself to reach out to the executive director of transportation, just letting him know that I felt like we could partner in some best practices for customer service. And he welcomed that. And so they invited us in, and my team and I have been working with that department. And really not me. I kind of assigned it to some of the male members of our team because it's mostly all men in leadership. And so we've been going out like once a month and doing trainings with the executive directors, the directors, and the supervisors of transportation. And so, at first it was a little bit rocky. It took a while to get the relational agreement together. Um, but it ended with, at their end of the year meeting, they invited us in and we had like a big luncheon and they had all this homemade food. And so as school starting back this year, we were invited to meet with all of the bus drivers. And this happened last week. So we're in a room with like 200 bus drivers. And if you can imagine bus drivers,
Oh
right? They're
yeah.
a little hardened,
Mm-hmm.
right? Some have been driving buses for 30 years. And what is this restorative stuff?
Mm-hmm.
So we go in there and, we're doing a little getting to know you activities. And it's like you could just see the needs there because they didn't even know how to interact with each other on
Mm-hmm.
the question we asked them to begin was, what decade do you resonate with, right? And they're like, what are we supposed to do with this question?
Mm-hmm.
And so, we're guiding them in how to sit at their table and go person by person, answer the question. But I feel like it was such a unique opportunity. And because of that work we're doing with the transportation department, another team, the early childhood team, has asked us to come in and train their leadership. So I feel like, maybe that will spread in our district
Yeah.
and we can do the top down and bottom up approach and get some things done. But I just wanted to share that because I'm really proud of that work. And we kind of did it in spite of our leadership because they're kind of new and they didn't really have any direction. So I said, you know what, we're just going to do this, and we've been doing it. They embraced us, and they want to continue the work with us.
That's awesome. I feel like with the bus drivers, because they're just, on their bus the whole day on the little walkie talkie, and that's all kind of the community or engagement that they get. So to be able to kind of share those type of things with their fellow
Mhm.
bus drivers, I think, they felt like seen or like they were a part of something, which is really, really cool.
It was fun.
I've actually had to hang out here for a while the last couple of weeks because I'm working on a webinar for independent schools, on preparing the climate to be able to create space for discussions that may need to happen leading up to the election and, the election and after the election. And so restorative is really that framework that encourages that community building so that we can have those collective conversations and begin to understand the concept that even when we land on different sides of a issue, any issue, The election just is the glaring one we are all looking at right now. So it's kind of that universal one, but really thinking about this building our skills and our muscle so that when we land on any side of an issue, we begin to, as Clara said earlier, honor each other's human dignity and recognize that different opinions don't dehumanize us, that we are still very much human beings and allowed to have different opinions, and really proactively talking about appropriate ways to express those opinions before people start showing up in whatever way they show up, the community having a conversation about, what is acceptable for the community for you to show up here and express your opinion. Not that we don't want to hear your opinion, but what we don't want, is, the various ways we've seen people show up that have caused harm in spaces.
Yeah, I like to remind myself we have these core beliefs in the restorative work that all humans are good. One of them is that all humans are good, wise, and powerful.
Hmm.
All humans are good, wise, and powerful. And so I have to say that to myself several times a day because I have some strong opinions. And, it's easy for us to just dismiss a person who has a different opinion than us, especially in this political climate. But I think the most important thing with the restorative work is that if we're doing those things to build community on the front end, like I said earlier, it's easier to go through our differences and to resolve those conflicts. Unfortunately, sometimes we're not allowed the space to do that, and we're coming in, as triage, which I hate, but I just really try in my little sphere to do those things to see that we're more alike than we are different. And if we are different, let's talk about that. We might influence each other to have a different opinion or a different take on something. With this election cycle that's really been going on for a while, right? It seems like we've been topsy-turvy for a while. I just feel like um I remember at a specific convention a few years ago, this man gets on stage and he's like, because of restorative justice, my kid's murderer walked free or something to that effect. And I was just like, why would he say that? People are jaded because, like I said earlier, they have one opinion of what it means to be restorative or to be a practitioner or restorative justice. And I think if we can come together in that circle space or some kind of community building to see that, this is what you know, but this is what I can also educate you on and just open our minds to that part. But I have to keep telling myself all humans are good, wise, and powerful somewhere in them at their core.
Somewhere. Yeah. No, that's so important. Because I had kind of forgotten how kind of divided we were. When the past election happened back then, it was a lot. So I kind of took myself aback from that whole entire world for my own mental health sake. But now that we're getting back into that, and you have to kind of stay in tune and in healthy doses, it's important to remember that all
Mm.
people are good and powerful
Good,
somewhere in there.
wise, and
Good,
powerful.
wise, and powerful.
Or
So,
assumption number one.
so what, I think sometimes people can get a bit overwhelmed with things like restorative practices or being intentional because it seems very big and it seems very like, oh, I can't do that. What are like one or two small things that you guys would give as advice or ways to implement restorative practices in the way they go about their lives, whether it be things like understanding the nine affects or circles or community building stuff. What are some advice y'all have?
Yeah, I think for me, John Bailey, who used to be the president of the International Institute for Restorative Practices, did a white paper on the science of human dignity. And he looked at universally what are those human needs, regardless of countries and states and, race and economics that appear. And so belonging, voice, and agency were the three that theme wise kept coming up, kept coming up, kept coming up. And so really thinking about, um, like Clara said, how do you give belonging, voice, and agency to yourself, sewing into yourself, so that you then can turn around and do that in your relationship with other people? Because if you can't do it with yourself, it is very difficult for you to step into spaces and honor who people are and what their universal need is. And so really thinking about what does that mean to make sure people connect, to make sure people, when things are impacting them, are having a voice in that, and you're empowering people to take ownership of things. So I love that Clara sent her team that represented who the bus drivers were to work with the bus drivers, as opposed to her saying, well, I'm the leader of the team, so I'm going to work on this, but recognizing that in that case, it gave empowerment to the bus drivers to have someone who showed up in the same gender space with them to come and do the work, and her support that.
Thank you. Um, I'm also going to reference a white paper that we use called Establishing a Restorative Mindset. And two things that I love about that paper is that, in one part, it says that restorative practices are needs driven and values based. And I think that we should try to do a better job of recognizing that a lot of behavior that we see in human beings is based on their needs, and try to seek out what that need is and do what we can to help fill it or refer them to a place where that need can be filled. And also to remember that a lot of us have some very common values that we share, and to, uplift those values and center on those. It also says something about the restorative journey is a moment by moment thing. So we have to always kind of think about, am I in a restorative space right now? Is my orientation restorative? Or am I seeking punishment or revenge? Or am I trying to decide what people deserve? Right? Just centering ourselves on, I know I'm not perfect, but I'm working to do this, and modeling that for the people that are around us, just like we would model something for, students in our classroom, or if you're an administrator, teachers on your campus. And I think by doing those things, that is how we get to the place of, cultural shift and change.
I think my advice, piggybacking on what you said, Clara, is understanding, that, and also what helped me a lot was really understanding, and you can just probably Google this, the compass of shame that you talked to us about, Dr. Chamblee, and just realizing how we kind of react or how we act whenever we're pushed into that space of shame, and how other people might have their own version of reacting, and understanding that maybe their needs aren't being met, or something affected them in that way. And then that allows you to give yourself grace, to give other people grace, and to just kind of take it slow, and not take everything so personal, because not everything is personal. Everyone's going through their own thing. But this conversation has even put me back into a restorative mindset. So I really, really appreciate it. I needed this, especially going into this election in September, where all these debates are going to happen, and then October and November. So definitely needed this. So I thank y'all both very much. And if y'all wanted to plug any kind of, like, if people like listen to this and they're like, okay, well, I'm kind of interested, what would you recommend them to go look up or contact to kind of get more into the restorative world?
Ooh, so I would send them to our Instagram, which is DFW Restorative Practices. So we are trying to actively post information for people and resources where they can connect more. They can also email me at circles@gardenofreading.org.
And our social media is not up yet. I'm so embarrassed. But they can email me also at clara@restorativerevo.com. And I'd be happy to connect with anyone who's interested. And Dr. Chamblee and I, we're colleagues. Like I said, she's my mentor. So I feel like they could contact either one of us and they get the same messaging, the same information, because I feel like both of us are truly in this work and we know how transformative it can be, not only for schools and communities, but for ourselves as individuals too.
Yes, definitely,
Awesome.
definitely.
Well, hopefully some people reach out. And again, like you said, this work is, although people might be scared of the word, it is revolutionary, and it's for the better, and it's really, I see it even changing the lives of the young children that we work with. So that's why I really love and believe in this work. So thank y'all for being great mentors and introducing me to the work.
Thank you for inviting us into the space.
Of course. And thank you to those of you who are listening. This project is part of a larger group project called The Connectivity of the Care Economy. How solutions centered around a care economy can get us away from that individualistic thinking and towards a society that values caring for each other so that we can all thrive. Other members of my cohort have also been working on their own stories that center around this topic, so please visit changewire.org, sign up for the newsletter, and you'll be able to read more of their stories and find out different ways you can get involved and how you yourself can work on becoming more connected with the community as we all work towards a better future. Thank you.